So as we look towards, as we head out through the day and we welcome our government panel, I just want to take a quick look back at where we've been. And I think Darren Fry set a nice tone for what we're trying to do here. Doing it in a carbon neutral way, I think, is important. It's important to everybody, and it sends a good message for the things we're trying to do. I think the announcement of a collaborative project with Waterloo is an even stronger indication of the industry's commitment to doing things in a more diligent and scientific way, and producing, I think, information and awareness and knowledge that can actually assist policymakers in a very real way. And so to that end, we have our government panel, and I'm actually thrilled that these folks agreed to work with us today, because they're busy. Just try to get them on the phone. And they responded in a very positive way, and I think they understood exactly what we were trying to achieve, and I think they understand how all of this is going to help them. So, do we know? Who are we starting with first so I can introduce? I should have cleared that up. Just the next slide? Okay, it's Donna Cerati. Donna Cerati is currently the Manager of Engineering for the Waste Management Division at the Region of Waterloo. It's our host community today, and has close to 20 years of experience in environmental engineering. Donna oversees the Waste Management Division's capital programs, including long-term planning, responsibility for design and construction of engineered landfill and environmental control systems, and monitoring and compliance activities for the division's active facilities and decommissioned sites. Donna managed the recently completed Waste Management Master Plan for the region. So would you please welcome Donna Cerati.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me. What I thought I would do this morning is just go through kind of a high-level snapshot of very focused on our local being in this region, issues, challenges, some of the questions that we're facing. And I think based on some of the presentations by the academic panel and certainly some of the questions that followed, we already see some very common themes emerging. And one of the questions that kind of came to my mind is, and I mentioned this to John at the break, is are we truly on the cusp of a paradigm shift here, or are we not? And it's certainly, if nothing else, the journey is going to be really interesting. So I'm going to try and just give you, as I said, a little bit of a snapshot of where we, at the municipal level, in the region of Waterloo, sit right now in terms of our journey. I'm going to skip over this slide and just get right into it. So our setting, this is an aerial view of, and what I've got highlighted there in red is our currently operating landfill, which is located not too far from here, a walk actually from here. And as you can see, a very developed part of the region. So to say that waste management in the region is integrated into the community is a very literal statement. And as those of you that are on the operations side of waste management facilities, I'm sure you can appreciate the challenges that we sometimes face with this facility being so close to our neighbors and our receptors. The other interesting thing is that through the diversion programs that we've implemented, particularly over the past 10 to 15 years, we are perpetually sitting at, every time we take a we take a report to council or speak to the media or submit a report to the Ministry of the Environment, we are perpetually stating that we have about 15 to 20 years of capacity left at this site. But everybody knows laws of conservation of mass, that at some point that site will be full. Excuse me. So some of our challenges, very locally, and some of these things I'm sure will resonate with many of you, particularly those of you from other municipalities, as well as those of you in the private sector that are providing services to both the public and private sector. You know, the fiscal environment is tough, and you know, it's getting tougher. At the region of Waterloo, waste management is a 100% tax-funded operation. So everything that we do has a direct impact, and everything that we don't do has a direct impact on the taxpayer. So we need to be strategic and very, very focused on how we run our operations truly from a business point of view, as well as the other pillars that we like to you know, that we consider in our decision making, being obviously the environment and the social impact, the triple bottom line, if you will. So that, you know, that does present a challenge, and never more so than in today's climate. I perhaps will apologize for my next bullet there, given that I'm seated next to a colleague from the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change. But truly, it is a fact that, again, in the present regulatory climate, the lack of clear policy direction is a barrier in that it makes decision-making difficult, because it introduces an element of guessing or second guessing, which is never a good thing. Another barrier or challenge from an implementation point of view, particularly for new and emerging technologies, would be the approvals process. And you know, I think I can just state that, and people will nod their heads, and that's a given. As far as our particular situation in Waterloo, as I said, at some point our landfill will be full. And we will have to answer the question, and we've started asking the question, what are we going to do next? What are we going to do with the waste that's going to continue to be generated, and particularly that stream that will require disposal or processing of some sort, the fraction that isn't diverted? What are we going to do with that? And it's quite possible that the answers to that question could be a really big leap from what's being done now. So what we're trying to be cognizant of or aware of is positioning this whole journey that we need to embark upon and take our politicians on and take our community on. How do we position that for success? And one of the very early remarks that Dr. Grover made actually this morning really struck me, and I wrote it down. I'm just going to read it because I don't want to misquote her. But she said, one of the key issues is framing an issue so that people can feel connected with it. And from my perspective, I'm an engineer, and I do tend to suffer from that lack of skill shortage, I guess it is, in terms of, you know, speaking a language that people will understand and getting to the heart of non-technical issues. But certainly, as far as what is required for success is exactly that, connecting with people, connecting with the community. And one thing I've noted in attending various conferences and even looking at media coverage from our jurisdiction as well as other things that are going on in the province, industry is really stepping up and starting to participate in that dialogue and making those connections. What I do see, though, is that at this point in time, academia is not at the table in terms of having your voice heard and providing that, you know, expert opinion, if you will, and having those credentials that people relate to. That is something that people connect with. The university researcher or the university professor. So I very much see going forward that engagement and political will and education kind of all roll and turn together. And one of the big challenges will be how to keep all of those things moving with some type of cohesiveness towards a common end goal. From a business point of view, and again, this is specific to our local context, given where our landfill is located, the geographic and social makeup of the region of Waterloo, in that we have very highly, intensely urban areas, but we also have very precious, I'll say, rural areas, and how to make decisions in that context from an environmental impact point of view and from a perceived or real health impact point of view. Certainly, we hear from residents and community members that live and work or shop in close proximity to our Waterloo landfill site that on occasion are aware of its presence because of prevailing winds and odors. That worries people, and that's understandable. So how do we speak to some of those things, and how do we get that message, and how do we make that connection that in our decision making we are taking care. We recognize, and I spoke about the fiscal issues or challenges that are ever present. We recognize that no matter what we do next, it's going to be a costly solution, where we can either smooth out that cash flow with some sort of export type solution, which basically results in a funding requirement almost in perpetuity, or we can, over a short term, invest in some sort of infrastructure-based solution that absolutely will have a much higher than we've experienced in the past capital cost, which then over time could demonstrate some sort of payback. So there's that decision to be made. From the point of view of climate change, and I will give credit to Golder, Michael Kant is here this morning, and this is some work that his team helped us with when we were looking at our master planning exercise. One of the things that we did was a life cycle assessment, and some of the earlier panelists spoke to the greater degree to which truly a life cycle approach is now being taken to address questions and challenges. And what I'm showing here is that the first bar that you see in kind of dark blue there is a calculation of the CO2 equivalent emissions of what our Region of Waterloo waste management system would look like if we put everything to landfill. The next bar, that is still a positive emitter, is a representation of our current system, which is about a 52% diversion rate. So you can see the big impact that we have there. And then the next two bars, with which basically show a net offset, are other options that we looked at from a very high level. Mechanical biological treatment, where there's energy incineration type of energy from waste option, where you have a much greater degree of resource recovery, and therefore can look to some very significant offsets. So again, you know, with the ever-present discussion on climate change being a reality, another factor in the decision making. As far as best practices go, I was quite impressed actually by a presentation that I heard. I was at the Americana conference in Montreal in March, and there was a presentation by a representative of the Cool Sweep project, which is a European initiative which actually is doing very much what I think where we are in this room here this morning trying to establish. So it's a consortium of the government at various levels of government, municipal, regional, provincial, and federal, and academia and industry. And they are doing some really interesting things. So I encourage you to, they have a nice website with lots of links. So I encourage you to look at that and see if there are some things there from a collaboration point of view that we might be able to take away and use as a model rather than reinventing the wheel. So in terms of moving forward on our journey, one of the themes that, or I guess the overriding theme that I had in my mind when I put the presentation together, which I think really meshes with the comments that we've already heard this morning, is that united voices are important, and united voices and a united message is a strong message. And if that message connects with the community, then you've done the best job you can to position yourself for success. In my world, in our world, political will can be a showstopper. And public sentiment informs political will, and again, that it really is. I sort of see it as a whole bunch of wheels or cogs, if you will, turning together. And over time, And I think we have to recognize it's going to take a long time. But the fact that we're all here together this morning, talking about or posing some of the questions that we don't have answers for yet, demonstrates that the willingness to work together and chart some of those courses. So I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Our next speaker is Christian Fellski. Christian comes to us, historically at least, from Germany, where he was responsible for the design and operation of several landfills, composting plants, and anaerobic digestion waste-to-energy facilities. He is currently in his current role with the WMS of the City of Edmonton. Christian's responsible for overseeing the branch's processing activities, interactions with regulators, and for providing technical and scientific expertise through the branch's research and development activities. Christian is also managing the Advanced Research Energy Research Facility, which houses a pilot municipal solid waste gasifier and waste-to-biofuels process based on the Enerchem technology. And I should also point out that the CPIA will be organizing a tour of that facility on September 29th this year. So please welcome Christian Fellski from Edmonton.
Yes. Hello? Oh, yes. Thank you, John. Thanks, Krista, for inviting me today. The opportunity to talk a little bit about the Edmonton system and what we're doing also on the research side. Thank you to Walker to cover my carbon footprint, because it's I would say I haven't calculated this morning, but I think it's quite significant to come here. So thanks for that. So when I put these slides together, I thought I had only 5 minutes. So there's only 4 slides or so, but I can talk about them for a while. And I want to focus a little bit more after explaining about our system we do have in Edmonton. I want to also focus on the initiatives we do in combining or integrating research and development, and learn from the outcomes of research and development in our operations. So that's what I was trying, or that's what I will try to do in the next 10 minutes or so. So for those, Donna actually brought a good point up earlier, and I was thinking about that for my presentation, living without a landfill. That's a situation in Edmonton which occurred about 30 years ago, when the municipality recognized that the existing landfill, and the only municipal landfill at that time in the city, was getting full. And at that time, a lot of money and a lot of time was invested to find a new landfill site. And it became, as it always becomes, or most of the time, and becomes a political issue with regards to finding a new landfill site within the city boundary, because the council at that time and the waste management branch at the time wasn't able to cite a new landfill site within the city, mainly because of things like NIMBYs, the NIMBY impact, people not wanting to live beside a landfill site within the city. So that in the early 90s really led to a strategic change in how Edmontonians looked at their landfills, at their waste management system. So a 30-year strategic plan was developed at that time, which really focused on waste diversion, and we talked a lot about waste diversion in the previous session, and I'm sure we're going to hear about it more in this session. But also finding products, finding new products from waste materials, finding energy, and recycling more, diverting more, and really this led to the journey of what a system which is right now in front of you with the goal of achieving a 90% residential waste diversion by 2017. So in the 90s, when we started diverting, we initially talked about, obviously, the recycling, which was a big topic at the time. We implemented a recycling program. We have a blue bag system, a blue bin system in Edmonton, and it all goes to materials recovery facility. And we think that we see that about 20% of that material, of the total residential waste stream, gets recycled. Next up were the organics, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about food and the organic issue in itself. It still represents a very significant amount of waste stream fraction in the waste stream as it stands right now. So in the year 2000, the city built the Edmonton composting facility, and we're seeing this now about 14, 15 years later, reaching its capacity at peaks, because at times in the summer, the facility can't take as much material as it's coming in. And this is also, I guess, a result of Edmonton being a growing city. In the last 2 years, there were about 60,000 new residents coming to the city, creating more waste, which comes to us, and we as a municipality have the mandate to process it. So in order to deal with the rising organics amount which comes through us, we started working on an anaerobic digestion project, and we've now going through the stage where we identify technologies for that step, and we're going to build a facility which will hopefully be in operation by mid of 2017. So after all that's done, so recycling, organics, we looked a long time ago, even at the same time where the composting facility, way before my time with the city, we looked at what's left. What's the waste stream after we recycle, after we compost, or after we digest, or what we're going to do in the future, digestion of the waste, what's left in the value. So we came to the topic of energy recovery. Almost instantaneously. We looked at technologies at that time, which is probably a whole different industry regime as it was in the year 2000 than it is right now. We compared traditional waste-to-energy facilities and technologies, which I'm sure both of you guys are aware of. And we also looked at what's called thermal conversion processes, new emerging processes. And over time, we came to partner with a company called Enachem, which is a Canadian company. At that time was an offspring from the university in Sherbrooke, and they developed a gasification process, taking in that non-recyclable, non-compostable waste and really converting it through a gasification process into a synthetic gas. That synthetic gas needs cleaning, and that syngas, which mainly consists of hydrogen and carbon monoxide, well, then the idea initially was to get to power, but that that actually fell by the wayside very early on the project, and now the focus is on converting this carbon into higher value products, such as a biochemical, methanol, and further down the road to ethanol. So that's the current system, or the systems we have in mind. The Enachem facility is currently in commissioning. We hope when the tour comes around at the end of September, they will be in full operation. But so the goal is here to really take the carbon and convert it into higher value products, which then can be sold into the market, into the chemical market, but also in the fuel market. I should say, because we talked about this earlier, and it's not on the slide here, but we're increasing our effort into waste minimization. So we want residents to do the right thing at home. We have a great community engagement section within the branch, which has a bunch of volunteers go out, spread the word, what they can do about home composting, what they can do about grass cycling. How can we avoid or how can we reduce the amount of waste which comes to our facility? Because we have a capacity, we are faced with a capacity issues. Now we think through the economic slowdown, maybe that will change a little bit, it will ease up a little bit, but the projections are still that there will be 1.5 million people living in Edmonton in about 5 to 10 years or so. So, as I said, and at the beginning, our goal is to reach the 90% residential waste diversion in 2017. So what's this all got to do with research and development? And this is, I guess, one of the focus of this workshop, which I think it's a great idea. It's about time, and I agree with Donna that research and industrial research is not really at the table at this time. We're working towards it. We have some good examples in Edmonton where we're doing this. But I guess overall, as a country, I think we can improve. So one thing I wanted to mention, the first point here is actually directly taken out of our environmental policy, and that was actually developed quite some time ago, where it was really unusual for a municipality to include research and development activities and try to get the good points, the outcome of this research, and try to implement that into operation. And my previous life, I was a researcher, and now I'm more a practitioner, more an operations guy, and I realize what a hard task that at times is. So a couple of examples how we're doing it. The first one is the Edmonton Waste Management Center of Excellence. So very early, the city built, together with the University of Alberta at that time, some more colleges, also a consultant was on board, built this center to really look at how can we implement these research, these initial ideas, how can we develop them further, how can we make these ideas grow into operational practices, realizing waste as a research, and that's the point while I mention it right here, is one of the focus, and it's also the focus of this workshop. So current partners are from the academic side, the University of Alberta. From the industrial side are a water and wastewater utility, EPCOR, and from the government side that includes waste management services and also drainage services from the city of Edmonton. So here we come together and we're working with, we're trying to implement a research project. We're trying to get graduate students to come to our facility to do their work at full-scale facility, getting their hands dirty. And in every project, I understand there's a scientific outcome, but there's also, we try to focus also on the operational gain, what we can gain as a city, what we can learn from this project in our day-to-day operation. The second example, and John mentioned it, is the Advanced Energy Research Facility. This was built when the NACAM project was announced, and it mostly was funded through the Alberta government, what's called Alberta Innovates Environmental and Energy Solutions. It's a provincial research driver in the province. When they heard about the biofuel project, the waste to biofuel project, they got excited about the opportunity, and they provided a big grant to NACAM, but also about 10 million of that grant went to build a facility which houses a pilot gasification unit. It houses a catalytic lab. It provides space and access to companies which want to come to Alberta or to Edmonton in particular and want to scale up their technology to the next level. So out of the lab scale into the demonstration type scale of facility and processes. So it's a very successful facility. It houses the gasification pilot, as I mentioned, based on NACAM technology, but now it houses also some other technologies which came out of the University of Alberta. Forged hydrocarbon is an example for another technology developed. It uses lipids and converts it through pyrolysis and some other steps I'm not even try to explain into a diesel product. So it's really a successful facility, kind of like a hub, so to speak. And for us as a city, again, it's the same idea as with the Center of Excellence. It's like we're trying to improve our operations. There should be cost benefit or operational benefits to the city. I try to, this slide, I try to look at the questions which were given for this panel and try to get my own thoughts. Like, I'm sure there's much more, but try to identify critical research areas. Obviously, they are critical research area for myself or for our operation, but I'm sure they must find some kind of a tone with the people who are in the room here. So, waste process optimization. We heard from Donna, everything where we take material and not putting into a landfill or will bear higher cost. So the goal of optimizing waste processing in any kind of form and to reduce that cost, find new ways to doing it, is extremely important. And I'm not talking only about chemical or biological processes. We're just going with a center of excellence through an exercise and looking at the mechanical pre-processing of waste, how to separate out organics, how to make good RDF. And when we take a look at the literature on the research, there's not much out there for waste management. And that's a really critical area for everybody who want to build these type of facilities. Higher value products, obviously, with higher costs, there should be higher revenues. We have to aim for that. Well, we need to increase our revenues. The syngas to biochemical biofuel is one step, but there's other opportunities. I'm sure some others are going to talk about maybe in the section after this. But also there's this point of how are we operating facilities? How can we learn? How can we optimize the operations-based, or the point here I made is the operations-based research. How can we really give our operators, the people who turn the piles, who push the buttons, who move equipment, really improve in their day-to-day operation? Because simply, I believe there's not much as involved in that area. How can academia help? Collaboration is, I think, one of the good things, or one of the great things about this workshop is get people in one room talk. What are common industry problems? Identify them, phrase them, and try to tackle them, obviously. Practitioner-based research, very important for us, because we're practitioners, we want to improve our operation, but there's also some fundamental research work still need to be done, in my opinion. And I heard a CBC podcast not too long ago, very interesting, on the decline of fundamental research in Canada. So that led me to the point that I think fundamentally we still have a lot of things to solve in the waste management, the waste processing research. And also we talked about this morning, policy development is important. I can talk about the Alberta experience, which is not really very positive as it relates to policy. We've been waiting a long time for signals, and we even moved on some of the signals, and then last minutes they were killed. For what reason or ever, I think it's important to have a common policy, and maybe research, maybe academia can help into igniting maybe that discussion. Okay, so I'd already talked a lot. I only had 4 slides, so I talked enough for those 4 slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian. Beth Gujar holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemistry from McMaster University in Hamilton and has been involved in the public works field at the municipal level for 28 years, primarily in solid waste management. During her public works career, she's been responsible for the development and implementation of a wide range of environmental policies and programs. Beth is currently the General Manager of the City of Toronto's Solid Waste Management Services Division. In this capacity, she's responsible for all of the solid waste management programs and services for Canada's largest city, serving a population of about 2.8 million people. So welcome, Beth Gujar.
Thanks very much. It's my pleasure to be here and bring another perspective of municipal government. And being from Toronto's largest city, you can appreciate that we have a lot of waste that we have to manage on a daily basis. So I was thinking about the question that was put to us, and I will talk to you at the end of this about how I framed it around people, processes, and technology being the key areas where we need help with research. But in terms of setting the context, I just want you to appreciate a little bit about what it takes to get waste moving through and out of the City of Toronto on a daily basis. And I tell my staff, we're the garbage fairies. We make it look easy, and somehow people put stuff out in public space recycling containers or at their curb, and we make it disappear. And the wastes that are removed from the City of Toronto go anywhere from Niagara Falls to almost near Ottawa. So we really stretch across the province in dealing with all this waste. We have a budget of $370 million per year for operations. We deal with 1 million tons of waste per year from about 1 million households. About half the households we have are multifamily, and that's starting to grow. So it makes it a real challenge in terms of dealing with that particular sector, and you'll see a little bit why that's the case. This slide shows you the 5 core service areas that we provide, and one that's pretty unique to the City of Toronto is the city beautification function. And this is something that is typically in the public realm, in the transportation realm, and sometimes is forgotten about. So when you're out and throwing something out when you're in a park or in the streets, this is something that we do look after at the City of Toronto. We have 8,000 street litter and recycling bins, 6,000 park bins, and we pick up after major events, over 1,000 events per year, things like the upcoming Pride Parade that's coming up this Saturday. So it's a huge undertaking. We have a significant collection network to get the materials from our various customers. We have a transfer and network, 7 transfer stations that all the material flows through and then out to our various processing facilities. The residual management is primarily our Green Lane landfill, which we purchased back in 2008 for around $230 million. And so that's a key resource for us. It has about 15 years capacity for us right now. We also have 163 legacies from the past scattered around the City of Toronto of our closed landfills. Energy, recovery of energy falls under the residual management as well, and that's an area that we're working on developing. And last but not least is the education and enforcement of really helping residents understand how they're using those programs. What we're finding is that we have these really good programs in place, and we're doing very, very well from a major municipality perspective. And we started out at 44% overall diversion in 2008, and finished off at 53% diversion. You can see that most of the diversion is coming from our single-family homes. It's really, really difficult to tackle the multifamily homes. We've got programs in place for full recycling and organics diversion there, but that's an area that's requiring a lot of development. Another thing you're seeing here is that we're kind of stalling. So it's once we've got the launch and the fanfare, how is it that we're going to be increasing the participation in these programs? And that's a key area that we need a lot of help in. When you look behind these numbers, some interesting things. The total waste that we're managing is actually increasing. So we're starting to see more commercial waste come to our transfer stations from the private sector. It's really hard to get around in Toronto, so our local options are looking pretty good now. That means our garbage quantities are going up. Recycling is actually decreasing a little bit, and that's an interesting dilemma for us. But some of it is with the lightweighting of packaging, and think about the newspapers that we used to read 10 years ago, and the lack of paper. I'm trying to go paperless here, so that's really making a big difference in what's being set out in our Blue Bin program. Another strange one is our source-separated organics. This is one we're trying to figure out why that's the case when we've expanded capacity for our multifamily. Where are the organics going? Are we really being successful at reducing food waste? So this is a troubling one for us. Yard waste has gone up, and that has a little bit of an explanation. We had a huge influx of yard waste because of the ice storm in 2013. I wanted to let you see what we're thinking about in terms of an internal working document. This is our strategic framework, and we have 5 objective areas where we're trying to improve our operations to be an international leader in solid waste management. And you can see specifically that we have research and education in solid waste as a key area for us. But I'm really thrilled to be at this workshop today to start making those connections. It's a pretty busy operation to make sure you're getting rid of that 1,000 million tons of waste per year. So how do we establish those connections and get the research? We have lots of garbage, so anybody need garbage, please contact me later, and we're happy to work with you. I also wanted to share with you an interesting example of unexpected research. We recently introduced, approved buying new green bins, and as part of our research, we retained a professor at York University, an animal behavioral specialist, Suzanne McDonald from the Department of Psychology, and she tested our green bins with raccoons. So raccoon research and making our green bins raccoon-proof were something that those of us have been in the waste industry a long time now wouldn't think, wow, do we have to include that in our testing? Yes, we do. So this is a good example of how you create those partnerships. And Suzanne was an important part of our discussions with the community. So she was able to talk as part of our media events about her research on raccoons and why these bins were a good solution. I wanted to show this slide. There's been discussions about the reverse supply chain, and because we're garbage fairies, we usually just say, here are numbers and this is what happens. This is really what the reverse supply chain looks like. Municipalities take whatever anybody doesn't want or can't figure out what to do. We're expected to deal with that, and you can see along the left we have our it could be a home, it could be a multifamily. We also deal with some small commercial that isn't suitable for collection in the bin system in the private sector. So once we have all of that, now we have to figure out these collection systems and the various bins networks on how to collect them. We have the transfer stations, which become a huge way of sorting and collecting that information. And on the right-hand side shows you all of the processing facilities where the final resting place of that particular waste stream goes. So on the top is the green bin materials that we have, which is an anaerobic digestion system. We have the leaf and yard waste. We have our recycling facility, and then the other recycling is a whole bunch of other stuff that we're trying to find markets for. Mattresses is a huge one for us that we're working on. And then the stuff that's left over that we can't figure out what to do with ends up in the Green Lane landfill. So this is really, I think, helping the conversation of appreciating all of the things that happen in this logistics and network to reverse engineer what the producers and folks are putting out at the curb. To give you a daily context, we have about 125 tractor trailer loads of material that we have to move out of the city on a daily basis to our various facilities. 50 tractor trailer loads of recycling, about 60 of garbage, and about 15 of source separated organics. This slide is just another slice at what we're grappling with. So this is information from waste audits that we do, curbside waste audits. So homes that are what's still left in their garbage bin, this is the profile of that. So we're really trying to tackle how do we get more people to get that organic waste into the green bin? How do we get more recycling? It's doing pretty well though, and there's a lot of other residual material that we still need to figure out those markets for. In terms of the opportunities and challenges, I wanted to frame the discussion, as I said, around the people, processes, and technology. And really the underlying question here is how, as we began the day of moving away from a waste management to a resource management type of thinking. So my hope really at the end of the day here is that I don't have a job, but I'm thinking that based on there's a lot of work out there to do, that I think I'm okay for the next 5 years or so, that we don't want any more waste. And as I mentioned, municipalities are the garbage fairies. We started out because people came together in cities and it was a public health problem. So, okay, let's solve it, we'll figure out and just get stuff out of the city. Then we figured out, oh no, we're harming the environment. We're filling up wetlands and ravines and gullies. So we applied our collective thinking and solved that problem through collaboration. And then now we're getting all these materials and we're thinking, hey, there's a lot of resources in this, and what is it that we can do with this material? So it's really shifting our culture from one that looks at just what we can get rid of to what are these valuable resources that we have. So I would put it out to really to producers of products and packaging, deal with it in the design phase. We don't ever want it. And then if you have to give it to us, then please give it to us in a way that it could be disassembled or there's some common materials. So huge amount of research that can be done in really fine-tuning and what's happening with those valuable resources. When we're looking at the people side of things, I asked my team actually, what do you think about this question of what's the more research? And it was the engineer on my team that said we need to focus more on people. So I think there's a lot of great work, there's a lot of technological solutions out there, but think about the things that are driving what people do and interact with our systems. So number one thing, where people live. People are living in high rises in more dense, compact urban form. How do we get trucks to those places? How do people get the materials out of their units? How do we access those facilities is a huge problem for my particular team. How do we make the systems easy to use? And so people have to figure it out, and really always in the research putting the end user at the center of that stage and figuring out, making it as simple as possible. The communication, motivation, I was really encouraged to hear about the amount of effort on the social sciences, and I think how we can bring more of that into the technical side of things will be really, really critical moving forward. Even the cultural aspects, Toronto is such a diverse city, it's not good enough for us to put out materials in one language anymore. A big one that I identified in the people side of things is public trust and confidence. Because we've been reactionary and didn't think through all of the consequences, that's eroded confidence for people that we know what we're doing. So that's actually spawned a lot of the research on energy from waste, that we had polluting facilities. We didn't react quickly enough so that those facilities could be improved as we went. So the general public are afraid that we don't know what we're doing as industry, as academics, and that we can confidently address those problems. So really thinking through those unintended consequences. I think the big thing is, even with this diagram here, is the idea of collaboration and integration and thinking about all aspects of the problem when we're trying to find the solutions is a key aspect for people. On the processes side of things, one of our huge challenges is data management and data integration. I think there's a lot of information out there, and I know it's on the discussion for this afternoon, but really there is a need for big data for waste management and trying to get systems talking to one another. We had just a grade 12 class from Woburn Collegiate. They developed an app in a couple of weeks that was a really cool solution. So the app is get your smartphone out and say what you have to throw out, and you're on the street and it tells you the closest waste bin, and that app could also be used to track our assets in the field and go on to tell us how full bins are and when we would need to service them. So that's really cool, innovative thinking that is things that are really helpful that we got from a grade 12 class in a couple of weeks. So I can only imagine when we apply that kind of thinking and research on a broader basis. The redesigning our processes is really important, and we've got a lot of complex processes out there, so that's something that I know we need a lot of work with, and as government we're really good at developing really difficult processes without keeping the end user in mind. Another thing that's been talked about already today is measuring results. and that's a key area that we can use help on, is KPIs. How do you measure things, and what's the right measurement? Diversion as a percentage of total waste managed has been the measure, but it doesn't work anymore. Our waste stream is shrinking, so it's not as valuable anymore as a way to tell how well we are doing as an industry and as municipalities. So that's something that we really have a pressing need for in terms of figuring out. Another thing around processes, I think a fundamental question is really about our economic and accounting system that's allowed to externalize social and environmental costs. So we're really trying to shoehorn an industry into something that's about continual growth and progress, and we haven't accounted for those softer inputs into the system, and that's making it really difficult. So that's some important research, I think, for economists and accountants as well, to figure out how to capture these and what does this look like in the future. And around the processes, I think figuring out the roles and responsibilities. So it's really encouraging to see the number of diverse areas being represented in today's discussions, and figuring out what part we play. Breaking down those silos is something that's really critical in moving forward. The last area of technology, I think my colleagues have covered off some of those areas. For me, the biggest area is integrating the energy and the waste industry appropriately, and trying to find ways that it can work in our North American and with our Ontario context. For example, our Green Lane landfill is in the middle of nowhere, not connected to any grid, so it's making it really difficult for us to capture the energy there. And even when we're working in the urban settings, how do we integrate with buildings? The European systems are so much more advanced, so that's a really big gap for us as well. So a lot less on the technology. I think please keep up the great work on the technology frontage, and figure out ways for future collaboration. And again, really thank you for the opportunity for sharing my thoughts, and look forward to working with everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Beth. Our last speaker on our government panel is John Ourmiento. He's a professional engineer working for the Government of Ontario, and is currently the manager of waste diversion programs at the Resource Recovery Policy Branch of the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change. He's been with the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change for over 25 years, focusing on provincial waste diversion policy. So please welcome John Ourmiento.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. Unfortunately, I have to apologize, I don't have a presentation for you, but that might be a good thing because I'm the last speaker before lunch, I guess, so I'll try to be as quick as possible. I'm here to talk about the provincial perspective and policy development that the province goes through when it comes to waste management. And it is a little bit different, maybe a lot different, than what municipalities, for example, need to worry about, in that we're trying to deal with the overlying rules and requirements for the province as a whole. We're trying to determine what the best framework, regulatory and otherwise, we need for the province, for us to increase and maximize the amount of material that gets diverted, but also to reduce the amount of waste that's generated in the first place. So in order to do good policy work in this area, we have to first determine what's the problem we're trying to solve. What fundamentally are we trying to achieve? Well, when you look at the numbers, the problem is pretty straightforward. Every year in Ontario, and most recently, we're generating about 11.5 million tons of material. Now that's, when you think about it, a pretty astonishing number, considering we have just over 13 million people in the province. When you work it out, it works out to about 2.3 kilograms for every person every day. It's a lot of material. Now, you might think, well, I don't generate 2.3 kilograms or about 5 pounds. That's true. On a daily basis, you don't. But you don't throw out your TV or your couch or a mattress every day. That happens periodically. In addition, this number includes all the other waste, not just the waste you as an individual generate, it includes all the waste that businesses generate. It includes the waste that is produced in factories and in rural areas, et cetera. So it's all the waste that's managed and generated in the province. Of that amount, you've heard some numbers already today, but yes, only 27% or so is being diverted. That means over 70% is going to disposal. And that's fundamentally the problem. We've got to change that. We've got to change not only how much is being diverted, but we have to change that big number, how much is being generated. Right now, as a society, we do have a few circumstances where people are reusing materials, and it's good. And what we'd like to do is to move more towards reuse. But more fundamentally, we want to move towards reduction. And we're seeing it in some parts of the economy. You know, we don't have to look very far to see what's happening in the electronics area. We know that the products are shrinking, they're smaller, they're lighter in weight, and on the whole, that's a good thing. You know, we're reducing the amount of resources that are going into that. But having said that, the current framework that we have in the province is flawed. There are some problems with it. We have legislation called the Waste Diversion Act. It's the key legislation that we have in the province for diversion. It's one of those pieces of legislation that is working really well from one perspective, it's working not so well from another perspective. We have 4 programs under that framework. We have the Blue Box program, we have a program for household hazardous waste, we have a program for electronics, and we have a program for used tires. They're achieving really good results in terms of diversion. You know, our tire program is not only diverting pretty much every tire that goes into the province, but we've eliminated stockpiles that used to be around this province. It's, you know, it's great. You don't have to worry about tires, you know, showing up in fields, et cetera. It's also really increasing manufacturing of products based on tires. The infrastructure is growing. Markets are growing. It's a great positive story. Same thing with electronics. We've got actually way more capacity in this province to recycle electronics than we actually generate. Again, that's not necessarily a bad situation to be in. It means we have opportunity to bring electronics in from other places and recycle them. Blue Box has been in place for a long time, so it's generating, it's recycling a lot of material and it's generating markets for those recovered materials. It's a positive. Same thing with our household hazardous waste program. Good positives there. We're recycling probably more batteries, single-use batteries, than anywhere else in the country. A few years ago, that was unheard of. Nobody was recycling batteries. So, great positives. However, the regulatory framework and the actual way that the legislation works has been creating a lot of friction and a lot of difficulties from a stakeholder perspective. People who are affected by this legislation, we're talking about producers of the products, we're talking about municipalities, we're talking about waste management companies. None of them are happy. They all have concerns. They, you know, you heard earlier, one of the issues is it's not really clear what everybody's role is, what the responsibilities are under this legislation. And that is a challenge. We also know that there are stakeholders who essentially, they don't necessarily know where or what it is that they need to do. They don't necessarily know who they need to work with to achieve their results. There's nothing driving them to improve the outputs of diversion. They just need to fall in line and do what everyone else is doing, and that's the best thing for them. Nothing spurring better behavior. The oversight body, and we have someone here from Waste Diversion Ontario, is both the operator and developer of the program and the overseer of the program. And there's a bit of a conflict in that role, because it's difficult for you to be responsible for something and yet at the same time need to be the oversight body. In addition to that, they also don't necessarily have any strong tools to encourage or make sure the compliance that's necessary with these programs to make it happen. So that's another challenge that they have, and it's a challenge that the stakeholders recognize as well. That's one piece of legislation. We also have regulations in place for the IC&I sector. And the IC&I sector is probably the one place that you've heard the most, certainly here in Ontario, where diversion is very low. You heard some numbers, 11%, could be more, it could be less. The simple fact is, it's probably better than that, but we don't have the data or the information to verify. And that's one of the flaws with the current system, is we just don't necessarily have the data to know exactly what's happening. We know that more is being diverted than those numbers are showing. Numbers come from Stats Canada. Stats Canada, does its best every couple of years to get this information, but we have to find ways to get better information. With better information, you can do better policy work. Anyway, that's the current framework. It does have some flaws. There are also some other pressures that we have to recognize in this province. There's financial pressures. We know that municipalities, we know producers, various parties who are responsible, they have pressures, and diversion is expensive. The Blue Box program alone, net costs of about $230 million annually. That's shared 50-50 between municipalities and industry, and it's growing every year. Neither one of those parties feels that the current system is the right system for them. So we're looking for ways to fix that as well. Also, landfill space, you've heard how challenging it is to site new landfills, and it is challenging. It's very difficult, both from the local concerns, the residents, NIMBYism, whatever you want to call it. Nobody really wants landfills near them. We all need them. We know we need them, but it's very difficult to get a new landfill site permitted. It also takes a long time to do. Could take 10 years or more. So yes, there is capacity, certainly in Ontario, but that capacity is going to run out if nothing changes. Diverting waste, reducing the amount, recycling it, is going to lead to a lot longer landfill life. Hopefully we can keep what we have for a good long time. We're also hoping to look at the positives of changing the current framework that we have. And what we'd like to do is move away from our current more linear economy to a circular economy. We want to have one or an economy that takes materials, as people use them, when they don't need them anymore, this material needs to come back into the broader economy, whether it's through reuse, whether it's through finding ways to recycle it back into original resources, or whether it's through other resource extraction. It's valuable material. We have to continue to build that and put that into the economy. Doing this would create jobs. It's no big surprise. The more you do with materials, the more you're producing value, you're adding value to the economy. You're also driving opportunities in the economy in terms of adding new infrastructure. In addition to jobs, you're also building technologies and research. All of those things help the overall people in Ontario and the overall economy. GDP increases as well. And there's the big plus from an environmental side, besides just landfills, is you're reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You're reducing them both because you don't need to extract as much raw material, you don't need to necessarily transport it or refine it into the material, because when you're recycling material, for example, you tend to use a lot less energy in doing so. Now that's not universal, and we know life cycle analysis can give us different results, but in general that's what we find, is that you're going to be saving a lot of energy and hence greenhouse gas emissions that come out of the burning of fossil fuels in particular to generate that energy. So as I mentioned, stakeholders are calling for something different. They're looking for a new framework, and the province has responded with a commitment to put forward new legislation. What I'd like to do now is essentially talk about what we're looking to do in broad general terms. For those who are familiar, they know that we're looking to have new draft legislation out this fall. That's the target, and we hope we can achieve it. What we're looking to do in that new framework is, as I said, we're going to try to move towards a circular economy. We're going to try to increase the resource productivity that comes out of waste rather than sending it for disposal. But we're also going to be looking at waste reduction. We're going to be trying to create an infrastructure that promotes reducing waste, gives some tangible benefits to producers and consumers to reduce how much material they consume and what needs to be dealt with. And only at that point do we then deal with trying to increase what does result from product use, and deal with how do we recover that to the greatest extent possible. So once we've dealt with reduction, we're going to try to achieve an efficient, cost-effective recycling system in this province. We're going to try to put in place the rules, the drivers that'll get us there. And we're also going to try to increase the market in Ontario for those recovered materials. Because without the market, you can generate, you can recycle, you can have a big pile of useful material that nobody needs. It's just costing a lot of money and it's not benefiting anyone. And, with all due respect to other places in the world, I don't think, we want to be shipping all of that great material that we've recovered in Ontario halfway across the world, increasing again the emissions that go along with the transportation. What we'd love to do is to have it dealt with locally, whether that's Ontario or in the nearby jurisdictions, certainly better than shipping it across great distances. So market development is going to be a key of what we're trying to put forward. So as I said, we're going to put forward a new framework. It's going to include a piece of legislation that's going to enable us to move forward. It's going to enable us to put regulations in place that are going to target producers. This is a producer responsibility framework. So it is actually very similar to their current waste diversion framework, but it's going to be done in a different way. I'm not going to get into all the details. That could take a long time. I'm just going to simply say it's a framework that's been consulted on and will continue to be consulted on. Our goal is to get it done right for Ontario and looking at other jurisdictions and taking their best practices as well. We're also going to be including a strategy that goes along with this legislation. It's going to be a strategy on, more broadly speaking, how do we increase the diversion in this province beyond just producer responsibility. Producer responsibility works great for certain materials. It doesn't work so great for other materials. Organics, for example, is a really common example of something that it's kind of hard to identify a producer to be responsible for example, leaf and yard waste. Don't really know who the producer there is. So we're going to be looking at a strategy to grow the amount of waste in the province that's going to be diverted. And lastly, we're going to be looking at provincial interests that go along with the rules and regulations. And this is essentially the guiding principles and framework of what we're trying to achieve. These interests are going to identify what it is we're trying to get toward, trying to identify who should be responsible for what. It'll help clarify some of the confusion or some of the difficulty that people are having with today's framework. And yeah, and I think with that, I'm going to end right there. I'm just going to say one last thing, and that is for those who are looking at the upcoming legislation as having a lot of detail on how we're going to move forward, I just want to say this is still an enabling framework. This is going to allow us to put the rules in place to actually put new regulations in place. We're going to be dealing with stakeholders and consulting thoroughly on each one of those. So sometimes, you know, we're often asked, so what's your plan for this waste, or what's your plan for that waste? We're going to talk about what we're trying to achieve through our strategy, but we don't at this point have the details on each and every waste. But with that, I'm certainly open to any questions that the audience may have.